Hey future York students!
I'm Sidel.
And I'm Neetha.
And welcome to the Faculty of Liberal Arts and Professional Studies Program Chat Series.
We want you to know that here in LA&PS, you will study what you love and learn what you need.
In this chat, you'll be hearing from future professors as well as current students about the program.
What it has to offer you, like internship opportunities.
And what your first year in the program may look like.
Alright, should we get started?
Yeah, let's get started.
Enjoy, everybody.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to our Liberal Arts Professional Studies program chat. My name is Adam Duncan. I'm the Recruitment and Liaison Officer for the Faculty of Liberal Arts and Professional Studies. We're here to talk about one of our newest programs and one of our more interesting programs, which is the program in Indigenous Studies. So like all of our program chats, I'm going to begin the day with a land acknowledgement. This meeting is virtual, and because of that, we are not all actually gathered in the same space. York's land acknowledgement might not represent the territory that you are currently on, and I would ask that if that is the case, that you each take the responsibility to acknowledge the traditional territory that you are on and its current treaty holders. As a member of the York University community, I recognize that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with the territories upon which York University campuses are located that precede the establishment of York University. York University acknowledges its presence on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. The area known as Takaranto has been taken care of by the Anishinaabeg Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Huron-Wendat, and the Métis. It is now home to many Indigenous peoples. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This territory is subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. I would now like to introduce a special guest who's going to talk to us a little bit more about our Indigenous Studies program, Professor Benita Lawrence. Good afternoon, Professor.
Good afternoon. Hi there, everybody. It's lovely to see you virtually today. I'm going to be using a slideshow to tell you about the Indigenous Studies program. So I'll be doing that in a moment. Hi again, students. So the Indigenous Studies program is in the Department of Humanities at York University. And first of all, I thought I'd tell you who the professors are in Indigenous Studies. Now, myself, I'll start with me. I'm not in the slide because I'm talking to you. I'm Mi'kmaq, originally from Shediac in New Brunswick, and I've been teaching at York for about the past 20 years. I tend to teach a lot of third and fourth year courses, so you might not see me until later in the program, but I teach, among other things, a course called Indigenous and African Diasporic Relations across the Americas. I also teach a course in First Nations music. I teach Indigenous literature. And of course, I do a fourth year theory course, which you'll be taking when you're coming out of the program. In terms of everybody else who can't be here today for various reasons, Brock Pitawanakwat, he's Anishinaabe from Whitefish River First Nation, and he teaches Introduction to Ojibwe, or Anishinaabemowin, if you and as well as courses on treaty rights in the Indian Act and Indigenous methodologies. Now we have Jesse Thistle. He's Métis from Saskatchewan, and he'll be the first person you'll see in the program. He teaches Introduction to Indigenous Studies as well as Métis Studies. He's also the author of a best-selling book, From the Ashes, My Story of Being Métis, Homeless, and Finding My Way. And it's been sort of #1 in Canada for quite a long time. So, but he's a wonderful guy. So he's, despite the fame, you'll enjoy taking courses with him. Finally, we have Michael White. Now, Michael only teaches one course from Chiging First Nation, although he's been conducting ceremonies in Toronto for over 20 years. And he teaches our Indigenous Spiritualities course. Now, there's a big question mark here. We have an upcoming hire. We will be shortly hiring somebody to teach Mohawk language and culture, because of course this territory is part of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy as well as Anishinaabeg peoples. So what's Indigenous Studies about? I mean, it's really about language and culture, learning about the peoples who've shared this territory since time immemorial. That's central to Indigenous Studies, and you'll have a chance, as I say, to teach to learn Ojibwe if you wish to, or Mohawk in the future. As you know, the two nations that share this territory. It's also about land. And there's, in some ways, there's a political relationship here. What treaties were signed between Canada and First Nations? How did Canada end up with 99.8% of Indigenous lands? What can we do about that? All of that we'll be exploring as well. And finally, questions of law. How have laws such as the Indian Act been used to control Indigenous peoples in the past and in the present? How can this be changed? So the course is a combination of culture, spirituality, and the issues facing Indigenous peoples today. That's kind of the program in a nutshell. In terms of what degrees you can get in Indigenous Studies, and this is very simplified, you can do a specialized honor of 60 credits. Then you have to do a lot of other credits, general education courses. You have extra courses to take. In all, you have to take 120 credits, and you'll learn more about this when you arrive. You can do a major or a double major, so you can do Indigenous Studies and another course of another program that you might be interested in. It can be a program anywhere in the university. So that's you'd have 42 credits per program, and then you have to do your other courses such as general education, etc. All will be explained to you when you come. You can also do a minor, which is 30 credits, and you'll do that with a major program and other courses for 120 credits. You can also do a 3-year BA, which is for 90 credits. And as I say, when you enroll, all of this will be explained to you more clearly, so you'll understand how it works. So what would you be taking in first year? First of all, with Jessie Thistle, you'd be taking Indigenous Studies, INDG 1050, Introduction to Indigenous Studies, which is a required course. Often our students take the Indigenous Spiritualities course in first year, which is another required course that Michael White teaches, INDG 2050. Often people like to take from Brock Petawanequat, INDG 2060, Treaties and the Indian Act. You should also be taking general education courses. And again, that will be explained to you more, but you have to take a social science 1000 level, 6-credit course. You also have to take a humanities course, which is usually 9 credits. And that allows for 27 credits. Some people take 30, but often it's good in the beginning to make sure you don't fill up your schedule too much. Because of course, coming into university life is a big difference from high school. There's a lot of things happening. It's easy when you're on campus to, get too involved with clubs and sports and things like that, other activities. So it's hard to make sure you attend to your studies. 27 credits would be a really good amount to take. And that's what you would typically take in first year. So what do you cover in Introduction to Indigenous Studies? We focus on the early treaties, and that was a time really when Indigenous peoples were dominant. Europeans conformed to our ways of life. And that's important to know. The focus is on French and British colonization histories to understand how things happened. And then when you get to around the 1860s or so, when treaties had they'd acquired much of the land base, you get a lot of issues of control happening. The imposition of the Indian Act, you get residential schools, which I'm sure you've heard of, but you get a better sense of how and why that happened. You learn about something called the 60 Scoop, the taking of Native children, and the various repercussions. You will be learning about some of the negative things that happened with Indigenous peoples. And sometimes I think you may have learned stereotypes about Indigenous peoples for substance abuse, suicide, over-incarceration. All of those things are a result of a certain era in Canadian history that we're now trying to get through. And finally, you'll learn about Indigenous resurgence, which is the good part, cultural, artistic, linguistic resurgence, and reclaiming land. So it's a real good introduction. When you finish with Indigenous, Introduction to Indigenous Studies, you'll really understand a lot, and you'll be in a better position to then start exploring different aspects of Indigenous studies. And we have an awful lot of courses for you to take. As I say, Introduction to Anishinaabe. You have Indigenous Peoples in Education. There's a Global Indigenous Histories course. We have so many third year courses that they kind of started there. One of the things that we do have is Indigenous cultural experience courses, where you can work with an individual professor to do any kind of cultural experience that you wish. Now, it has to be usually within organizations, for example, the Native Canadian Centre in Toronto or other places that where you may want to, learn a language that isn't taught yet here, or, learn how to make powwow regalia, things like that. And I should say at this point that a good deal of our students are Native and a number of them are non-Native, and both are welcome, obviously. We want to see, everybody take Indigenous studies. It's important for all people. So in third year course, we have Indigenous women courses, the course that I teach, which is now called Black Indians and Native Black Relations, but the name's going to change. Courses on Indigenous knowledge and the environment, Indigenous peoples' legend and memory. When we get into fourth year courses, it's quite interesting. And of course, we have our required third year Indigenous methodologies course that Brock Pitawanakwat will teach. When you get into fourth year, there's another Indigenous community-based experience. We have a lot of interesting literature courses, Indigenous literature, survival and sovereignty. One of our professors who only teaches part-time in the program, horror, crime, and the law in Indigenous and African diasporic fiction and performance. Another one on science fiction that way. And the fourth year required course, Indigenous history. So that's you get an awful lot of variation in the program, which is, I think, a lot of the students really enjoy. So what can you do with an Indigenous Studies degree? Because that's always important. You want to be able to, work after you finish. It's a really good prequel or predecessor to taking law. If you're interested in law, Indigenous Studies is a really good program to take. It's also very good if you want to do a concurrent education degree, for example. Having credits that address Indigenous studies is very useful. It's very good if you want to go into social work, journalism, policy work. There's court worker positions, working with Indigenous organizations and non-governmental organizations. So there's a good deal you can do with an Indigenous Studies degree. Now, finally, for more information, you contact me. I'm the coordinator this year. And there's my email address. And I think, you can Google me and you'll find me. Also, Thea Razia is our staff member for Indigenous Studies in the Department of Humanities. So that's that. I think that you would enjoy the program very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Lawrence. That was fantastic. Really nice overview of some of the courses that I don't think a lot of students are aware of. I did have a couple questions for you, if that was okay. You mentioned that both Native and Indigenous students, as well as non-Indigenous students, take the program. And I get a lot of questions from Indigenous students about the kind of supports that are available. Would you mind talking a little bit about that for us?
Sure. I guess first of all is the Center for, it used to be called the Center for Aboriginal Studies. It's the Center for Indigenous Studies, KISS, which is a nice little name for it. And that's a place where not only do you get a lot of guidance, there's positions there. You can do cultural courses. There's an elder there, for students to engage with. And it's also a place where non-Indigenous students come in if they want information, So that's a really important part, the Center for Indigenous Students Services. The second one is the Indigenous Students Organization. And that one is also welcome for non-Indigenous students who sort of join to support Indigenous students. And one of the things they get involved with is that we have a powwow, and it's been going on for about 20 years in Toronto. It's a really well-known powwow. Everybody in Toronto comes to it. And the Indigenous students and the non-Native supporters organize the powwow every year. So that's one thing that they usually enjoy doing. And there's social events, etc. So those are the two main supports that are, really prominent for Indigenous and non-Indigenous students.
Yeah, that's excellent. And we're really looking forward to getting back on campus to be able to take part in some of those activities again. I also get a lot of questions from students who are curious about if there was anything they could read in the summer coming up to their first year. They're eager to get started. Do you have any recommendations for a book or that the students can get started with?
I think one of the best books, and it's kind of geared for people who, it's not deep reading, because let's face it, you're reading it in the summer before you start university. It's a book by Arthur Manuel, and it's called The Reconciliation Manifesto. And it addresses the histories of Indigenous peoples in Canada in a very concise, short way. Short sentences, short paragraphs. The man believes in being very, clear for students. And then it talks about where we are now and what we can do. So I would recommend the Reconciliation Manifesto by Art Manuel. It's also not very expensive, which helps, you don't want to have to spend a lot of money.
Yeah. Oh, a lot of expenses coming up in the first year. So saving on that is certainly a good idea. And I think that's something I might add to my own reading list. That sounds really interesting.
Hope you enjoyed the program chat, everyone.
If you have any questions about our LA&PS programs, be sure to visit our website to learn more.
And make sure to stay in touch with us for a chance to win a $100 gift card to the York Bookstore. The link to our website is in the description box below.
You can also send your questions to us, the LA&PS Student Recruitment Team.
We'd love to hear from you, so send us an email at goyork@yorku.ca.
And we look forward to seeing you all on campus next year.
Bye.
Bye.